we need to go away and do more data collection on those species to understand the sustainability. Wild collection is a significant thing that's targeted. I'm sure everyone in this room would say that they get mental health benefits from keeping fish. Potentially a lot of you might be asking, what can keepers do to help?
This talk from Dr. Matthew Bond of OATA dives into the role our hobby plays in conservation and sustainability. Matthew also explains who OATA are and what they do for our hobby behind the scenes. I hadn't planned to film the full talks at Love to Reef, so there may be a couple of sections missing. The opinions shared are the speaker's own. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, stay mindful and keep reefing.
My name's Matt Bond. I'm here on behalf of OATA. Some of you may have heard of us, some of you may not have done. So I'm here to talk to you about who we are, what we do, and a bit of an outlook for the aquatics trade. So firstly, I'm going to just a bit of an overview, going to go through who we are, what we do, overview of what the aquatics trade in the UK looks like at the moment, some key facts and figures, what the marine side of the trade looks like today, some of the pressures that there are on the aquatics trade, and how best to counter some of that anti-trade pressure and rhetoric that's out there. So OATA stands for the Ornamental Aquatic Trade Association, which is quite a mouthful, which is why we say OATA a lot. And we are the standard setting and representative body for the UK aquatics trade. And what that means is we've got about over 800 member businesses from the aquatics trade, and it covers all breadth of the aquatics trade, from retailers all the way up to importers, manufacturers, consultants, wholesalers, you name it. And what we do as part of that role is we set standards for the trade and the trade obey, and then we also represent trade, and I guess by proxy keepers as well, to government. Now, when I talk about standards, I'm talking about things like our code of conduct, which ask members to deliver on things like welfare and biosecurity. But what sits on top of that is the really wide range of guidance that we offer to industry and also to keepers as well. And that can be like a thick, weighty document like our biosecurity guide, which allows shops to meet their biosecurity obligations. But also all the other bits of guidance that we provide, which are for educational purposes. So things like our care sheets, and we've got the widest range of care sheets of any sector of the pet industry. And those care sheets are key for educating keepers, and they've been reviewed by industry experts and fish vets. But they also help shops meet their licensing obligations. So when a shop gets licensed, has a pet shop license, they have to provide some kind of care information to the end user. Sometimes that can be verbal, but that can also be in the form of things like care sheets as well. And these QR codes allow you to just have them in the shop, give them a scan, and then that means you're providing care information to people. And also we provide different tools as well. So this is our biosecurity assessment tool, which has just been relaunched recently, which allows shops to go through all their different processes and be like, where are the areas that we can improve? We're also a City and Guilds accredited training body. So we have online training, which is mainly geared towards leveling up industry, but also we have people outside of industry increasingly taking those courses as well. We also do in-person training as well. So that photo down the bottom there is of some in-person training we deliver to local authority inspectors. So those are the people that give out the pet shop licenses. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the people that give out pet shop licenses don't often don't have any background at all in even animal welfare, let alone fish welfare. They're often the same people that are delivering the licensing for taxis or takeaways, that kind of thing. So it's important to us to make sure that they know what the fish welfare needs are and what questions they're meant to be asking. Because often you end up getting friction between the shops that sell fish and those that license them, because the people that license them don't know what appropriate questions are to be asking. So it's all about smoothing out that relationship, and education is a really important part of what we do. And another important part of what we do is us being very evidence-driven. Now, some of you may have seen out there on our stand, we've got our Fishing for Facts report, and we produced that in 2021. And what that is an overview of the aquatics trade, and what that helped us do is identify some key knowledge gaps. So things like sustainability, for example. There's a lot of unknowns around sustainability. So where there are knowledge gaps, we want to be able to improve on those. We want to be able to improve on those knowledge gaps, and we do that in various different ways. For example, we're partnered with a couple of PhD students, one of whom is looking at sustainability in the marine aquarium trade, and the other's looking at conservation and societal benefits as well. So when I talk about this representative function that we do, we partly do that ourselves at both an international and a national level directly to government, but we're also a member of various other partner organisations as well. So the Companion Animal Sector Council, for example, we're a member of that, and that directly reports to government to help inform welfare policy. So we push for sensible things that deliver for fish welfare, and also push for the removal of things that aren't really relevant to our sector. Same with the European Pet Organisation as well. Although the UK isn't in the European Union anymore, what happens in the EU will be observed by the UK government. So it's important that if there's welfare changes within the EU, they reflect the needs of our sector. And we also are a member of conservation bodies as well, such as Shoal. So a bit of an overview of the UK trade in numbers. So every year we do a trade statistics report, which is free for member businesses to access. So we estimate the UK trade is worth over £1 billion. And that might even be a little bit of an underestimation, because there are portions of the trade that we don't have access to data for. There are thousands of species in trade, and 15% of UK households have an aquarium, which means that we estimate that at any given time, about 100 million individual fish are living in the UK as pets, which makes them the most populous pet in the UK. So that's greater numbers than cats or dogs, which I think it's quite impressive, really. And in terms of the freshwater marine split, that's a question that often gets asked, like what portion of the trade is freshwater, what portion of the trade is marine. It generally hovers around about the 80-20 mark. So in favour of freshwater. Obviously with different market trends that tends to dip up and down, but for the past couple of years that's been relatively stable. So in terms of the marine trade, most fish that you guys keep in your aquariums, I'm assuming most people are reef keepers here in some shape or form, come from nations that have coral reefs. And just in that pie chart there, that shows some of the biggest importers into the UK of marine fish in 2024. And a lot of those countries are either small island developing states, or they're less economically developed countries. And even in the cases where they're not, often the communities that are catching the fish for your aquariums are some of the poorest and most remote communities in the world. And in terms of that wild collection versus captive split, in terms of how much, if you go into a shop, how many are going to be captive, how many are going to be wild collected, this figure from our wild caught report, that 90-10, that's from 2016. That's probably a bit out of date now. We've done some more recent analysis that suggests that it could be northwards of 15% of the marine fish that you can get hold of are going to be captive bred. Again, that's something that's very much subject to market trends, but on average, we think it's going to be around about that 15% mark. So part of the reason why we as an organisation sort of champion the wild collected portion of the trade is that there's a lot of conservation benefits, as well as benefits to those people in source countries. There's a lot of conservation benefits of wild collection, and that part of that's passive. So if you took wild collection away from a lot of these communities, their alternative livelihoods could be a lot more environmentally damaging. You're talking about things like benthic trawl fishing, coral mining, ecotourism, that kind of thing. But also, it's important to remember that a lot of the people involved in the trade in source countries engage in pro-conservation behaviours. So that's things like coral farmers providing coral stock for restoration efforts, for example, or fishers deploying artificial reef structures. These are really important functions that people in source countries are doing, which are actively supporting the conservation of coral reefs, which are an impacted habitat. So in terms of pressures on the aquatics trade, one thing I would say before going into all this is a lot of our work is very strategic. It's we take a very broad view of the trade as a whole. So we probably see a lot of pressures that the average keeper might not always be aware of. And our role as an organisation really is to keep a sustainable keep a sustainable flow of trade. And maintaining good standards is really a key part of that. If we can demonstrate as a trade and as a keeping community that we operate to good standards on things like welfare, biosecurity, sustainability, that means we can demonstrate to government that we've got our house in order and strict regulations like bans, for example, aren't warranted. So that's something that we really try and push, and that's why we've got all this guidance available. And we work with government to make current law fit for purpose. That's a real significant pressure, and that's a real significant part of our work. Most of you who have fish in this room, it's a good chance that some of those fish have been caught up at a delay at the border, particularly post-Brexit. And whilst, yes, there's an economic argument to us saying to the government, you need to keep things flowing across the border effectively, your systems need to be fit for purpose. There's also a welfare argument that we make there as well, because if you think about a fish that's come from Bali, it's come from the Philippines, it's been packaged in oxygen, it's sitting in a polystyrene box. If a government IT system goes down, then that fish is being prevented from moving to its end destination and unpacked in a safe, welfare-friendly way. So those are the things that we really do get on to government officials about, and it's about making sure that they're holding up their side of the bargain. And we also feed into welfare policy as well. So as I was discussing with that Companion Animal Sector Council stuff, we feed into welfare policy to try and make sure that pet shop licensing is actually delivering welfare, and it's not just a box ticking exercise for people. But arguably, one of the most significant things that we do is countering negative messaging by anti-trade groups, and we do that using the best evidence possible. And those threats from anti-trade groups occur at the international level, the national level, even down to the regional level. There's a lot of pressure on devolved administrations at the moment, particularly Scotland, by anti-keeping groups to push for really stringent controls on the trade. So in terms of the kind of things that get levelled at the trade and anti-keeping groups push for, wild collection is a significant thing that's targeted. A lot of these groups are calling for bans on wild collection, which of course we wouldn't agree with because of all the benefits that wild collection bring. Positive lists are another thing that's being increasingly pushed by anti-trade groups. Now, a positive list essentially reduces the number of species that are legal to trade. So effectively, we have a very, very diverse trade, thousands of species. That would be scaled down. If these proposals went through, that would be scaled down to significantly less than what we currently have. And what we say to government in response to that is there's no clear welfare benefit to reducing that diversity of trade, and actually diversity of trade actually can beget good welfare. If you have a diversity of trade, then that means that people can pick the right pet for their lifestyle. Some people might want a big tank, some people might want a small tank. The ability to be able to keep an aquarium in like a flat, for example, is probably better than someone having like a huge Doberman. So another pressure that we frequently feel is through international regulations. A lot of these groups will engage in international regulations to curtail the availability of certain species. And often this isn't really based on particularly good data, it's often based on rhetoric and emotion. So a bit of a case study of some of the work that we do. Who here has heard of CITES? Hands up. So that's a reasonable numbers. Now, for those that haven't, CITES is an international convention that governs the trade in endangered species. And how it does that is by listing species and puts controls on their trade. And what that can mean is, for the highest level of listing, that can sometimes mean an effective ban. So if for example, a species got listed and it's not really been able to be captive bred, it can't be sourced from the wild anymore, that can equal an effective ban. Now, that's not to say that listing isn't appropriate in some circumstances, but it should be based on the best evidence possible. So CITES hosted a workshop with the aim of understanding the trade in marine fishes and making recommendations about the trade in marine fishes. And this was attended by government officials, industry representatives such as ourselves, scientists, large international organisations like the UN, for example, and some anti-keeping NGOs. Now, these anti-trade groups, we knew they would utilise a process like this to push for recommendations that would restrict trade based on poor data and very emotive messaging. So things like, how is it acceptable to rip animals from the wild? That kind of thing, and glossing over the benefits to both wildlife and people. So our way of dealing with this is we worked with partner organisations such as Ornamental Fish International to present an evidence-based framework to give a clear work stream going forward. So we collected industry data and we created this framework, and the idea is we recognise there are some species where there's unknowns. We don't have enough data to be able to tell what's going on with them. And we presented a framework to recommend species for further research, not necessarily these species need listing. It's go away and do your homework first. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't something that got adopted into the recommendations. However, one thing we did succeed in as a sector was avoiding a lot of negative wording that would have unfairly penalised trade. So, for example, a recommendation to countries to start listing species, because it was clear during that workshop is that we need to go away and do more data collection on those species to understand the sustainability. So in terms of how we deal with some of this anti-trade messaging, evidence gathering is a really important way in which we do that. Part of that we do ourselves, but we also do that with other partner organisations as well. And that allows us to sort of champion what is good about the sector and also fill those knowledge gaps I was talking about earlier, and where necessary, make changes to our standards, make changes to our guidance so that we can address those knowledge gaps when they're filled later. And that allows us to continuously review the standards and guidance that we have, which allows trade to deliver on things like biosecurity, things like sustainability and welfare. And when we do those things, that allows us to challenge that anti-trade messaging at all the levels that it comes in at. And that's not without its challenges. A lot of these organisations are multi-million-pound organisations. The trade in these conversations at international level and national level, the trade is a very, very small part of that overall machine. And frankly, we're dwarfed by a lot of these organisations. So it takes a lot of work and a lot of resource to adequately fight that fight. And another thing we do is to really push that positive messaging about the trade. I'm sure everyone in this room would say that they get mental health benefits from keeping fish, that they have better scientific literacy, they know more about the nitrogen cycle, that kind of thing. They know more about conservation. And, those are really important things to champion alongside the conservation benefits and the benefits to some of the poorest people in the world. So that's how we do our account of that anti-trade messaging, but potentially a lot of you might be asking, what can keepers do to help? And one thing, if it isn't already apparent, is that both industry and keepers are under a lot of scrutiny by these organisations. You've got Hollywood A-listers putting their names to very, very negative. Well, I don't want to call them documentaries because I think that's being too kind. And you've also got high scrutiny on things like shows, on pet trade shows, for example. So we need to be seen to operate to the highest standards possible. And a big way of doing that keepers can do that is supporting places like bricks and mortar stores that are licensed and operate in the law. And also do the homework on the species that you're buying, fully understand their welfare needs, and also understand if they're legal to trade in. I think that's an important thing that we can all do to play our part to support a thriving trade that brings benefits to all of us in this room and the people outside this room. Thank you very much. I've rambled a lot. Any questions, anyone?